Okay, here we are. We're ready to start NV Rant number 2. Okay, the first one was called Your Mind is Your Strongest Muscle. Now, for you guys out there that are watching and gals, and you want to debate that the brain is not a muscle, then you're just watching the video for the wrong reason. Let me tell you, because I know it's an organ, but it makes a point of your strongest and biggest asset, right? Your strongest muscle, something that you can depend on and lean on. So let's get that out of the way, okay? I'm going to continue to say your mind is your strongest muscle. All right, if you guys want to split hairs, great, do that. But hopefully a lot of you that are watching, a lot of this stuff will help and you're not worried about stupid shit like that. So regardless, let's be clear. So this here is the second time I'm doing an NV Rant. The first one, as I said, was your mind is your strongest muscle. This is in conjunction with going through my book, 7-Figure Decisions. And I mentioned in the last video that I was going to go chapter per chapter. Now, the first chapter is mentorship, and we're going to talk some about that. But it kind of tied into chapter 3, which is success is a game of inches, right? And then chapter 4, which is pattern interruption. So I'm kind of going to do 1, 3, and 4 and lump them together just so it flows better. In the book, the way it reads, it's fine. But I think if I just hop back and forth, I'm going to be hitting things in each chapter and hopping around. So we're just going to do them together and we'll still get the same point made through this process, okay? Now, one of the things I'll say is the reason this looks different, and I said this in the last video, is I got all this wazoo technology. I really don't know how to use it. I have a producer. When I do these, I'm on my own, so I put my camera up here on this little tripod. Lucky I can even get that figured out, but I did it. And that's it. And you'll see me turn the video off with my finger at the end, and it's not your high production deal. This is just to get a message out that I want to be clear. The reason I do these and the reason I'm focused on this vein right now is because, as I mentioned, when I went through some things in my life, these are the things that catapult me into finding success or being able to stick to things to be able to get to success, because there are a lot of people that are on their way to some sort of success, but when an obstacle comes up, a challenge comes up, a fear, could be so many things, a lot of people don't follow through and finish. And it's because of a lot of things that are up here in your strongest organ, your mind, your strongest muscle, your biggest and strongest asset, which is the ability to get shit done and to have the strength, the mental and emotional strength to get to success. I mean, listen, some people find success and they bump into it or they find it in a different way. But most of the time you see self-made successful people, it's been a grind. And as I said before, success isn't always found on the first trip around. Sometimes you're going to trip and fall right on your face. And most people who have a lot of success in their life probably have just as many or more failures that you don't see, because you just don't see them. You see a successful man or woman who has businesses and a lot of things, and you see their success, you see their monetary success, you see things in their life they're doing that you wish you can do. And a lot of times those things have come at a cost, and they've come not easily, right? But the point is no matter who you are, what side of the tracks you're from, you can have success. Especially if you're living here in America. I can't speak for other countries, but I just know that currently, with all its faults and flaws and shit that goes on here, it's still the greatest country in the world that allows you, still at this time, hopefully it stays that way, the opportunity to find this type of success and to live the life that you want to live and not the life somebody else or a government tells you to live. So let's get into it. Again, if this is of course you might have already checked out, but if this is something that just doesn't resonate with you, yeah, just click it off, because, you know, I'm doing this for the sole purpose of paying it forward, because a lot of this stuff that I'm going to talk about helped me tremendously to get to some stages in my life that were successful and are successful. And I couldn't have done it without some of the things I'm going to tell you today. So let's talk about the first thing, which is mentorship. Now, mentorship is really close and important to me for a lot of reasons. And as we go, I'll give you some more background about the mentorship I've received in my life in three different categories. First couple of categories in my life were I had mentorship in real estate investing. I'll get to that. But I got lucky because the guy that, the individual who worked with me saw a bigger problem in me. And we'll get to that in a second. And the bigger problem was this, and my confidence and some things that were going on in my life. And unless I changed that, didn't matter what strat he was going to teach me, I probably wasn't going to get done. And we'll get to that. So, you know, I've had mentorship in business, in investing, and then I've had mentorship in the other portion, which is how to be successful, your mindset, what it takes to get to that point and be able to handle some of the things along the way, which was the biggest key for me. And that's why we're going to talk about this today. And then, of course, I've had mentorship and training in my poker career. And that probably as of just recently, maybe in the last year and a half or so, a couple of years max. And that's because I made a decision to start playing for reals. Before that, I was just wrecking it up, having a great time running businesses and showing up on maybe a Friday and making a donation or maybe taking a withdrawal once in a while. But just was doing it to blow off steam and relax. Once I made a business out of it, I decided, okay, we got to get a little more serious about it. And I had some, and we'll talk about that in a little while. I'll talk about both. But it really does apply. And by the way, the mental game in poker is just as important as the fundamentals. And I found that out too. And it's the same thing in business. So that's why you have to tie, in my opinion, your trade, what you're learning, what you're being mentored on, what you're trying to perfect. If you guys have ever read a book called Outlier, and that's the other side of success, right? Because in my opinion, you have to have the mindset for it, the mental toughness to be able to have the balls to go find success and to follow through. Well, the other thing is you have to take reps. And the book, The Outlier, talks about, like, you know, why do a lot of people from this area, maybe Canada or this area, why are there hockey players that are coming out here? Well, it's because they're playing year round, right? And so that produces more reps, more practice. In the book, it references, like, if you were going to play the violin, if you sat in your room and you just played that every single day, and you had the ability to be good at it too, because you have to have the coordination. It's something that comes a little natural to you. But even if it doesn't, just continuing to practice and take reps and pick reps. Like poker, you got to be on the felt. You got to have more time on the felt. You got to have more reps. You got to play more. You got to see more hands. I could give you a million examples in business. And so you got to tie those two things together. You can't just have a good, strong mental game without the training and the practice and the reps. And I don't believe that just with the reps and the practice and the training, if you don't have a strong mental game, it's just like a golfer. There's some golfers that are great when the cameras are off. And then as soon as it's on and it's for, like, you know, $1 million, they couldn't putt their way out of a paper bag because they freeze, or they don't have the mental capacity they choke, okay? And you could choke in business. You can choke on the felt, right? You're sitting making a good decision and your brain locks up and you don't have the reps in, you don't have the training, and you fuck up, right? And so this is all part of it that ties into it. And when I wrote this book, I made sure that all these principles are tied to my personal story, but they're in there. Because there is no doubt that without some of the things that I told you on the last video, your mind is your strongest muscle, and this one is success is a game of inches, or whatever the fuck I named it. I couldn't have done it without what's in this book. I couldn't have done any of that without the mental aspect of this. And so that's why it's so important to me and close to me. When you do find someone to work with, they need to be better than you, right? They need to have walked the walk. They need to have been there. If they're a real estate investor, they had to invest in hundreds of doors. They've had to go through the process, not just read the books. They have to know what it feels like to take that chance, to be in there and trying to get it done. It's the same thing, I think, if you're wanting to use this example sometimes. If you're a quarterback, and you're going to have someone train you, you probably want someone that has played quarterback, so they understand what it feels like to have the rush come on them and to call the plays and to lead and the techniques in there. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have a good mentor or coach. I know there are a lot of good golf coaches and mentors that don't go out and play, but they're great teachers. That's fine. But in my opinion, for me, like when I decided to take poker a little more serious, I wanted to work with somebody that was winning, that was known as the best or one of the best out there, and had the reps and the proof to back it, right? So it's the same thing with my real estate mentor, and I'll tell you about that process in a minute. Okay. Now I will tell you, when I was a young kid, and this is and when we talk about this, we're going to talk about belief systems, repetitions, like I mentioned, and I'll give you an example. When I was a young kid, from 0 to 10, okay, my father, who was my original, I guess you call, trainer, mentor, was someone that was later in life. He had me when he was 50, okay? And so he was really ready to have another child that he wasn't doing what he did for a living. He was home more, and he immersed himself into me as a boy who he wanted to turn into a man. And I'll get to some of the things he taught me. And then I loved baseball. So he pretty much became my coach and mentor and someone that would push me. And so I'll give you an example of how repetition, the outlier concept, and a mental game plays such a big part of it. Because from 0 to 10, with all that work and all the reps I put in, and I'd be out there catching ground balls. I was a second baseman, a shortstop, and I'd be doing it for hours. My dad would be either throwing or hitting the ball to me. And at some point as a kid, I'd be like, hey, is that enough or what? And he's like, you tell me. Is it enough? Are you the best yet? Like, do you want to play more? Do you want to stop now? Or do you want to keep perfecting this? Literally told me shit like that. And I'd sit out there for hours and balls would be hitting me in the arm, the neck, the bad hops, and I'd just be sitting there just being drilled all day, to the point to where, like, at that point in my life, you could not get a ground ball past me. I'll just tell you that. I was like the best out there at a very short period in my life. That didn't continue very long. It could have. We'll get to that. And and I felt and saw the success from that. I made All-Stars every year. Of course, I played every inning. I could hit, like all that stuff. I was immersed in it. That's all I did. Okay, it was the outlier concept with someone making me mentally strong to not give up. Okay, my dad dies when I'm 10. Okay, yeah, unfortunate. It's not the point of the story. Not looking for anything else. Whatever, shit happens, right? And we'll talk about that in another section in the book. It's something called victimhood. I do not believe that anyone, and I know there's some rough childhoods, believe me. So this isn't a blanket statement, but there are a lot of men I see out there, and I just say men because that's who I've had experience with, that I hear things out of their mouth like, yeah, I lost my dad. I just haven't been able to like ever be anything. Well, I don't know. I went through a lot of shit too from the age of 10 up. And I think it's a choice. And I don't believe in victimhood at all. Okay. I reject it 1000%. That's in my book. I reject it. So if you want to stand behind being a victim, you're on your own. You're not going to get anything from me. Now, I will sympathize with you, and I will talk about things that have to be changed in your life, with like pattern interruption, because people have had some really rough past that affect their personal lives, it affects their business. I get that, but I do reject it in the sense that I think it could be overcome. This is what I'm really basically saying. So my dad dies, 10 years old, and again, this isn't the point of the story, but crushed. Like I'm talking, I spent every single day, morning, noon, and night with this guy, just mentoring me and working with me, and like I loved being around him. It was almost a relationship that was ridiculous for a 10-year-old with his dad. No matter how close you could be, it was like that. So it was a rude awakening for me. But the point to tell you that is not to have you feel sorry for me, because you shouldn't, because those were the cards I was dealt. But the point is this. So now I don't have somebody in my corner. Let's just talk baseball. We'll just strictly talk that because it's bigger than that, but let's just go baseball. So for me, I don't have somebody taking those reps with me now every single day, pushing me to be the best, teaching me techniques, making sure I had the right coaching for stuff that he wasn't capable of. He would bring that in and to make sure I got it because he wanted me to be the best, but he wanted me to be really strong mentally and emotionally. We'll get to some more of those points too, because this all ties in. This is not about telling you stories. This is about giving you real life examples of how you could go one way or you can go the other, which I'm going to give you another example later, how a young man the same age was able to figure it out because I wasn't, okay? Because I was 10. I didn't understand that those reps were making me great. I didn't understand that mentorship of making me strong mentally was making me great. I didn't understand that. I just thought I was just good at baseball and I got lucky. Like, you know, hey, this is just who I am. I didn't understand because I was too young to understand it was the work I was putting in on all fronts, okay? So now, as time progresses, and let's just talk my baseball career, I'm not having that same attention, mentorship, no outlier shit going on anymore. Now, because things were a little rougher for me because of this situation, I started regressing a little bit. So the next year, I still was really good. Of course, you just don't automatically tank. But as you start growing up and kids start growing up and they're putting in the work and they're doing things, slowly I could feel the people catching up. And like, I'm still good. And then a little bit more like someone like, wait, man, this guy might be better. And now when you're used to being at the top and you're only have known success, and now you start to feel a little less success, you panic. You go, holy shit, what's happening here? And then more of that happens. Then the next year comes, and then people start passing you up. Now, you have a choice to make, but you're 10, 11, 12, so you don't know the choice. But the choice really was, okay, Nick, find another mentor and put in those fucking reps and keep going and let's go. But guess what? I didn't do that. I started to shy away from the pain of not loving how that felt. So what do we do when we don't like how something feels, or we don't want to kind of admit like something, or we don't want to face something? We do the opposite. And the opposite sometimes can be not trying or acting like you don't give a fuck. Because if you don't care, then it doesn't matter. So I started kind of acquiring a little chip on my shoulder, if you will, right? And I started kind of withdrawing. And then as I started feeling more and more, or experiencing more and more failure, that's exactly what it was, and non-success, I started pulling back even more as a 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old kid. And instead of making the right choice and having someone there to put me back on the tracks, I grew my hair at the time when I could grow it a little longer. And I started dicking off a little more. And I started for sure not practicing and just became that kid where I might start doing a little drugs at 13 or 14, smoking a little weed, hanging around with the wrong crowd, and surrounding myself with people with the same goals, which were no goals, because then you can't fail. And, I kept playing baseball and doing things and was involved in sports. But from that time on, like, I was always pretty decent, but I never was what I was when I was a young kid because I didn't put in the work. Just didn't. I was fucking around. And it showed. And internally, you're feeling a lot of pain. You're feeling the failure. But you don't know what that is as a kid. All you know is that you have to deny it. Push it away. Bring in that other bullshit that masks it, and then take that route. Because that's a lot of times what happens with young people and even people that are older. We mask it with other shit to not feel it, right? And that kept up through most of my life. I was pretty much a dickhead for most of my junior high school, whole thing. I was that guy. Yep, probably that guy. When I got out of high school, and I'll tell you, this is some of the other lessons that let me tell you this before that. Some of the other things that I was taught besides baseball and other things were life lessons. How to handle yourself. I identify as a man. I'm a man. My pronouns are man, okay? And so my dad was raising me to teach me how to be a man. And the hours that I spent with him, even as a young kid, he instilled a lot of things into me. And that was, really crazy because I was a 10-year-old kid, but my dad was a total man's man. And as we'd be driving around and him doing what he did for a living back in Chicago, he would talk to me and he would take me with, like on his pickups and all the shit, he was doing downtown Chicago. And as we would go along, he would teach me like, hey, you owe somebody something, you pay them. You give your word, you keep it. You do this. As a man, you take care of your family. Now, again, I understand some of you watching, if you're from the new generations and, you want to reject that, that's fine. That's just how I was raised. I was raised traditional. That's what I believe in, okay? Is you take care of your family, you're the provider. Now, I know that's changed. I get it. I'm only even saying this because I just know the world I live in now, and people think that that's something, but I believe in it. So those are the things I was being taught. And I could remember one other thing I was taught too is this, as he told me, you never, ever start anything, ever. You'd never be that guy. And that always resonated with me as I grew up. And I'll give you an example of how I was on the other end of it. And when I was before 10, I was really tiny, small guy, right? Just like really shorter than the other kids, skinnier, all that shit, right? You would never know it, but it's true. And I'd be on the baseball field, and there was this one time, I think I was like 8 or 9 years old, and there was this kid, he was a bully, and he was fucking with all the kids, and for whatever reason, he loved targeting me, and there's a lot of times he was screwing around, and I went to my dad, I'm like, hey, what are we gonna do about this shit? And he's like, what do you mean, what are we gonna do about it? What are let me explain something to you. Like, here's how it's gonna be in life. Like, unless you do something about it, and he goes, and I don't condone you start anything, but unless you take these steps in this process, it's always going to happen to you. And so you have to make a choice. And I can remember one day, and I didn't like that because I didn't want to fuck with this kid. I was scared. He was a big kid. And one day we were at the field, and I was eating these chips and chilies called Chili Billies and whatever. And this kid's throwing like the ball, trying to knock it out of my hand, and kind of hit it and knocked a bunch of shit out. And I'm holding it, and I look at my dad, and I'm like, hey, in my no words, I'm like, fuck. And he looked at me back like, fuck, it's not my problem. And I knew what he was telling me. And I just can remember dropping those chips. And I was scared shitless and running towards this kid and tackling him and just was giving it everything I got, right? And I can remember being pulled out of the air by my pants, by my uniform. And it wasn't my dad, it was the kid's dad. And then he put me down or threw me down or whatever. And I remember my dad saying to him, hey, listen, keep your hand off my kid. Your kid deserved it, okay? You need to train this kid to be a better person, whatever. That just, the dust cleared on that. And I can remember walking off that field, my dad and I walking, and I remember, I can tell you, I felt like the lightweight champ of the world, but it was a life lesson to me. And that lesson, that particular lesson was, you have to stand up for yourself, but you never are the problem, okay? And so, back to what I was telling you. I wanted you to understand that because that was the part, those were things that were part of the mentorship of somebody in your life that puts you in the right direction in every category of your life. And sometimes you need multiple people helping you. Like some people say they have a life coach. I don't know. But whoever it is or whatever you're doing, you should have somebody that's been there, that has had those experiences, and that can keep you on the tracks and keep pushing you towards success. Now, my mentor ended at 10, and I told you that I started going the other way. And I did, all through high school. Somehow, at around 19, 20, I kind of figured out that I was a loser, okay? I mean, in my book, okay? Because the lane I was going down was not going to find me success. So somehow I was able to sort of figure that out and kind of got my act together, okay? But not totally, because my massive mentorship came later on, and I'll tell you about that. So when I was 22 years old, just before I started a technology business, I started just selling and brokering. I told you guys in the last video, if you haven't watched it, go back and watch it. It's the Your Mind is Your Strongest Muscle episode. and I talk about starting this tech business just before I was 22 years old. And I was able, and I knew college wasn't for me, so this just happened. I'm not going to even get into, I think it's a waste of tape to tell you how I got into the business. I think the more the point is I got into the business at the right time. It evolved into a pretty big business. It was a white box. I was making white boxes, doing services, and built this into a pretty big business. And it was at the right time. So like I did some things that I think were good for the business, but right time, right place, and it worked out pretty good. But the takeaway is this. The takeaway is, and there's going to be another chapter in my book we'll get to, and it's called basically money intelligence. I had no money intelligence, so as much as I was making, I was spending. And I had a lifestyle. I was just talking about that with someone in the last couple of weeks, that like, just be careful, because the lifestyle you build, and you got mortgages and car payments, and you're leveraged on real estate, you're leveraged here, you're leveraged everywhere. As soon as your high income stops, which happened to me, and we'll get to that, the music stops, you're fucked. So I don't care what you're making or how much you're balling. You need to, if you're here, you need to live here. Okay? So when the music stops, you have a lot of time. Your lifestyle that you've built, you could maintain even if things don't go well. And I learned that the hard way, and that was just experience. So I built this business. I was killing it. I was spending everything I was making. I had payments on everything. I had things that I never thought I would have. It was crazy, but I didn't have life experience or money intelligence. I had a poverty mentality as I was spending as much as I was making. And guess what? There's something called the dot-com crash that happened in year 2000. So I started this in, I think, 89. And when that happened, it was a series of probably 3 or 4 years after that all the money that I made, the millions that I made corporately and personally, gone. And not only gone, and then in the minus millions. So I'm in my 30s. I got three wives, actually. No, a wife, 2 kids and 1 on the way, and a K through 12 education. And I basically was almost out in this business. And I was hanging on by a thread. I said in the other episode, I literally would be on the way to work on the toll road here by my house on the way to Irvine from Orange, and would literally be choking back emotions because of the pressure that I was facing when I got into that building. I was in a forbearance agreement with the bank, couldn't make payroll. They owned my ass. I was millions in debt, and I had all these debt obligations, and nothing was looking too good. And I'll tell you, I had mentioned in the last episode, it was probably one of the lowest points in my life, like to the point to where I won't go any further than that, just to say that it couldn't have got much lower for me. I was literally, especially on weekends, I'd just be there paralyzed with fear and the unknown and not knowing what the hell to do. I was inches away from losing the home I was in, and it was over leveraged, everything. Leveraged it to the max, bought it right, went up a ton, and then used all that money to put good money and good leverage into a bad situation, which we're going to talk about in a minute, because if you are a business owner, there's something I want you to hear. And so, I went through this for a few years, struggling, battling, living a really dark time in my life, and I had someone call me, a decent friend of mine at the time, and he said, "Hey, Nick," and he was in a business of his own business, and it was packaging business, boxes and shit like that. And he was going through the same thing as me. He was losing it, was over leveraged, had too big of a lifestyle. I mean, our lives were so parallel. Misery loves company, so we talked all the time about how fucked we were. But he called me one day and he said, "Hey, what are you doing on this particular weekend from like Friday to Sunday?" I said, "I don't know, man. What's up?" And he said, "Well, it's the weirdest thing. I went to this thing and I listened to this guy talk, and I wound up buying the 3-day real estate class. It cost me $6,000. Oh, first of all, he didn't tell me that. He said, "But they say I could bring somebody with me." And I thought of you because you're in the same situation as me. And I just said, "Hey, dude, listen, I need Friday through Sunday to recharge my battery so I could cry my way to work on Monday to figure out how to figure this shit out. I just don't think I'm interested." And then he told me something really crazy. And he said, well, okay. He goes, I paid $6,000 for this course. And you know what my first thought was? Fuck, thank God there's someone still in this world stupider than me. Okay? I'm telling you. But he put a value on it. And it was interesting to me. And it caught my attention. And I'm like, wow. Obviously, I went. And by day 2 of 3, I knew I was on to something. I didn't know what it was. I was in the worst time of my life, but I leveraged a credit card even more to go to the next level through this course. And it was a lot of money. And long and short, I went to, about a month later, I wound up in Orlando for a week training. And one particular class caught my attention, and that was cash flow properties. It was creating cash flow. That's mailbox money. That's something you buy, invest in, or create that at some point pays you and continues to pay you without working. It's called passive income, and that's in the book too. We'll talk about it later more. And so this particular guy teaching, his name was Chris. And I was pretty intrigued by this. And so I'm there for like 7 days. This was like on day 2 or 3. And, after the class, this guy had all those students coming up to him, talking questions. He had not enough bandwidth for everyone that was there, but he did his best. And I remember approaching him once, and I'm saying, so naive at the time, and I'm like, hey, man, Chris, hey, do you think you could mentor me? And I'm like, thinking back, I know it's just ridiculous. This guy had hundreds of students, if not thousands. There's no way he was going to do it. But I was just so green and naive. And he was very polite and said, well, you can have my email if you got a question. That wasn't going to be good enough for me. And so I approached him again at some point when I seen him through all the corridors, because there's all these classes you go to. And I'm like, hey, Chris, got a second? And he probably was sick when he seen me come in. And I'm like, hey, do you think I could, and I didn't have it. I did not have the cheddar for this. I was going to figure it out. And I'm like, hey, do you think I could pay you even $10,000 to spend some few days with me? I need more, man. This was really good, but I know I need more. And he's like, no, Nick, I don't do that. I don't have time. Family, I invest, I teach these things. No, shit. So I approached him one more time and made him another offer. And my final offer, the third time, I said, Chris, and he probably wanted to punch me in the face when he seen me. I'm like, please hear me out. I said, I will pay you $30,000. Please spend 3 or 4 days with me. And he looked at me and he just shook his head and he finally goes, okay, fine. And I'm like, oh shit, now how am I gonna get the money? But I figured it out. And I borrowed it, and I leveraged. And I was going to lose everything anyways. What's another 30 ball, right? 40 ball. So I meet with him. A few weeks later, I fly all the way to Florida, okay? I get to Florida. I'm a guy that is on his last breath coming up right before I go down to drown. And we start working together, and the things I was saying to him, probably on the first half of the day, he stopped me and says, okay, listen, I gotta have a talk with you because this isn't gonna work. And I'm like, holy shit, what did I do? And he's like, Nick, you wear your identity on your sleeve. Every time we're talking about something you keep bringing up, which he goes, listen, I know how screwed you are. I get it. You're almost bankrupt. You've told me this 1,000, because I probably brought it up 1,000,000 times, even prior to getting there, telling him my story. And he said, and I'm not downplaying how much pain you're in or how serious this is, but I'm going to tell you right now, you are not going to be successful until you change some things. I don't care what I teach you. And he said, let me ask you something. He said, do you have any life-threatening illnesses? I said, no. He said, do you have family? I said, yeah. He knew who my family was. And he said, we went through this list. Did you eat today? Yeah. He said, let me tell you something. You should be fucking ashamed of yourself. And I was stunned. And he goes, there's somebody laying in a hospital bed right now that would trade your problem they're looking just to have next week, and would take all your debt, all your bullshit, just to have the time that you still have left. They don't have it. Oh, and guess what? There's somebody in this world that hasn't eaten today. And he kind of went on, just fucking laying me out. And I'm not going to bullshit you. I was a little offended. I was actually taken back. I was at first going, fuck you, in my head. And then it dawned on me. He was right. And man, and he taught me these principles after that. For honestly, the stuff he taught me about this was so invaluable to me that yes, we wound up going through the whole process. I learned all these strats on buying properties and all that. But when he taught me about something called pattern interruption and about my negativity and my identity and why and how, he told me too, it's going to be a fucking grind for you to fix this because you really got a lot of this negative, like you're filled with it. And he taught me how to pattern interrupt something, and that is take the bad that's coming up out of your system and replacing it with positive. Now that's not easy to do, and that doesn't just solve your problems. You have to go out and grind. You have to go out and work. You have to put one foot in front of the other, see it, believe it, map it, execute. You got to do all that. But without this portion and teaching me, and my negative fear and thoughts would come in like every few seconds, where I would get overwhelmed with this paralyzing fear of my reality. And he just said, like, if you let that happen right now, what does it change for you 5 minutes from now? Nothing. What does it change really for you tomorrow? Nothing. If you're fucked, you're fucked. But if you're so paralyzed with this identity of failure, then you just are for sure. And he would teach me how to say and think things that were opposite of what my mind was telling me that the reality was. And believe it or not, as I would interrupt these things in my head and I would say them out loud, something just to replace whatever you're feeling, the opposite, then it started coming back like every 5-10 minutes because I was able to get it away from me. And then the more I worked it, it was coming even like less and less and less. And then and there's so much more to this. Like there's so many parts of this that have to be worked to get there. I'm giving you the $30,000 foot view of this. I'm giving you the macro information because you, to fix this, if you're listening and this is something you need, have to go micro. You have to really target these issues and get there. But we can't do that in an hour podcast. I'm 37 minutes into it, and I just can't do that right now. We'll get to that maybe at some point if I choose to go deeper into it. But just recognizing that this is something that exists is the first part of changing it. So that's what I'm trying to do, because I do have a lot of people come to me and say, or inbox me and say, like, how do I play in these games? How do I do this? How do you get successful? So I'm doing these for no other reason that somebody did this for me. And there was a lot of positive comments. I appreciate that in the last video I did. And if I could just help one person change their trajectory, it'll be worth it to me. Because this is just like something I'm doing just because I'm actually passionate about it. You see my logo back there. This is the podcast room. I do interviews with the players. Valerie is my co-host, all that. This is just a different thing for me. This is something that's like close to my vest, right? So I got that mentorship, right? And after he gave me the truth bomb and after I started working this, I started working one door at a time, investing in real estate and these strategies that I'm not going to give you here because it's just too long to do it. But it was a particular strategy that I focused on really solely for a while and that I worked with. And I will tell you, at some point in a few 3-4 years from there, I just kept grinding and I kept grinding and I kept moving and I worked one door at a time. And each time I had some success, my belief system would rise. And then I would take more action and my belief system would rise more. And I would continue taking these reps and I would continue working this process of making this my strongest asset, my priority. And I protected it at all costs because I had so many things coming my way in the world that wanted me to stay where I was. I had so many people. When I walked away, because I walked away from this business and I had a partner in the computer business and I took accountability for all the debt, all that. We made an arrangement, but I said I had to get out here because I read a book too in this process called Who Moved My Cheese? I can't remember the guy's name. I should have wrote it down before. It's a little book. It's about like 2 or 3 mice. And basically the premise of this is sometimes, like I mentioned earlier, that I was putting good money from my equity in my home that I was over leveraging because I was going to lose it. So I might as well just use the equity I made to survive and pay my bills and shit like that. And but I realized that someone had moved my cheese, but it took me too long, okay? I got attached to the business, was nostalgic. I started it, I had employees, all the stuff that kept me in something that I should have been out of. And it wasn't really my passion either. And it was never going to produce the fruit I needed. It wasn't going to support two partners. So there was an arrangement made. I walked away. And I'm telling you, I sat because I had to get out of the house, because I needed somewhere to go, because I got little girls running around and their friends and a house full of women, and I couldn't be home. So I went and sat at a Starbucks in Irvine, California with a laptop, a pen, and a paper, and a fucking plan. And I went to work every day. People would see me there. And guess what? All the people in my life that saw that big ass building that I walked away from, okay? A big computer building that was just full of pain and negativity at the time. And they just knew that I was like sitting in a Starbucks. They all told me, what are you doing? You're crazy. You lost your mind. What is all this new, positive, like train your mind stuff? Everyone thought I was losing it. And the norm told me to go back to the big building to, continue to do the things that society tells you to do. And I rejected it. And I kept working this, and I kept working the plan, the strat, because you can't just work this. You got to work it all. And I did it, and I just kept doing it. And then I wound up getting my own radio show, and then I wound up here and selling more properties. And I got to the point to where I was buying and selling 50, 60, 70 properties a month. And slowly but surely, all that debt was getting paid for. And then I started becoming Plus EV and just started gaining momentum, one door at a time, okay? There was a point that I mentioned in the last video that I literally considered not being here because I thought my family would be better off financially if I wasn't. That's how low I was. So when I tell you this and I expose myself and I show you this, it's because I want you to understand that if you see somebody playing high stakes poker for thousands of dollars, or you see a lifestyle or a certain car or someone that just has found success, there's a fucking story behind the success 9 times out of 10. And it's littered with failure a lot of the times. So what you have to understand, if you're out there and you're a new entrepreneur or you've had it and you lost it, whatever, you have to understand that there's backstories to success, which should be an encouragement to you if that applies to you. If it doesn't, turn it off. Just go away. But if it applies to you, then you have to understand that, okay? Because if not, you'll give up or you'll go down a different road that will never get you healthy. I don't know what those details are. That's something, how would I know? But I just know these principles are in place, and then I'm telling you this to help you, okay? And I don't know why, because actually I enjoy doing it. And like I said, someone did it for me. Okay, and they got me. I'll just tell you this right now. If I didn't have that beginning mentorship from my father, who I believe shaped me for who I am today, in a lot of ways, it's weird, man, because we're shaped at a very young age. And a lot of that shit he told me, talked to me, is deep in my core. It just won't leave. And to me, I think it's good stuff. And then if I didn't embrace and didn't have all that other mentorship that I had, I wouldn't be sitting here today. Now, it was a journey and a half. I lost everything. I told you that. I ran into it. When we get later in the book in chapter 6, I'll tell you another point in my life where I had to go to war, and this became my biggest asset. And I leaned back on it, and I've had to do that many times, many times. And I'll tell you, your system and your core is something that is talking to you subconsciously. So you have to get fixed if you got a lot of shit in there. And I'll tell you how I know that. When I worked my way, I'll tell you this, when I had my business, the time it got the worst towards the end was during November and December, because that's when businesses started buying less, shutting down, and waiting to the new year. And when you're in an unhealthy business, and you're in a business that depends on cash flow turning, because I had a lot of cash flow issues, couldn't make payments and stuff. So when business slowed down, my problem enhanced. And that's when Christmas comes and the family spends more money that you don't have, and you go deeper into debt. So I went a handful of years, maybe 3 or 4 years probably, where I sat at Christmases like a zombie watching my little babies open stuff that I couldn't afford. And I missed, it actually chokes me up. And I missed those times, even though I was sitting there because of where I was. So back to my point, because that fucks me up thinking about it, is this. When I was successful and I worked my way out of it and I started being plus EV and I was like now making millions of dollars, there was one time I can remember around November, maybe early December, where I started feeling really nervous. There was no reason to. Everything was good. But I was starting to feel really uneasy. A ton of anxiety hit me. And I couldn't figure it out. And about a week later, it hit me like a ton of bricks that this was the time of year. My body recognized, even though I'm in California, we don't have snow, but we have seasonal changes. The weather changes. It gets dark earlier. The leaves fall. My system recognized that time of the year and it tightened up because that's the time of the year when I'm fucked. And guess what I had to do? I had to go back to the program and work it and start going and pattern interrupting and talking these things out and working whatever it is that I work to get myself back in beast mode. Because it just was creeping in. Okay? Because we have a system and we have a core and all these things in your experiences are in there and they're in your subconscious whether you know it or not. And a lot of them keep you down. Okay? So let me give you an example of somebody, of a 10-year-old kid that had someone to redirect him. Now, I don't take credit for this kid's success. Who should take credit for it is his mother, who's one of the greatest mothers out there. I'm not going to tell you, well, I could tell you. And his stepdad, who put a sick amount of time into this kid for his sports and everything else. So I am not taking credit for anything. But I did have one interaction with him that I think helped very much and I think kept him on the right path. So I will tell you about that. So as I'm going through and I'm running my businesses, I have staff and there's one gal here that works with me. And she had, at the time, because it's years back, a 10-year-old son, ironically enough. And he played baseball, football, soccer, all that shit. And he's little tiny runt ass fuck, just like me, smaller than he, at the time. He's now growing into a nice young man. He's 16. He's a quarterback. He's a stud, all that. But this was a 10-year-old little shrimp who was really good at sports, like I was. And he was playing soccer at this point and got put from his team to another team. And he got put on a older team. There were older kids, older boys that were a little bit ahead of him. So now he goes from being the star to going into he raised his bar, and now he's not finding as much success. Basically, he's not the best, and he's not doing well. And he's starting to feel that little failure shit going on, and he doesn't understand it. So he comes to his mom and he says, I don't want to play. Same with me. I don't want to do this. I want to grow my hair long. I want to not give a fuck because I don't want to feel this. So he was starting that process. Just didn't want to play. Wanted to go do something else, play another sport. But his problem wasn't, soccer's not his thing. He's a football player now. He doesn't even play baseball. That's his thing. He's quarterback. But he had to figure that shit out. And when you're 10, you play all of it. And so she came to me and she's like, hey, he's kind of going through this. She's heard me speak up on stage when I was speaking about my real estate classes, but I would talk about this kind of stuff too because I thought it was just as important as success principles as it was teaching them how to flip and do shit. So she said, do you think you can take some of that, whatever it is, and maybe figure out how to help him? Because I think it's that same whatever. And I'm like, because I talked about this on stage, and I'm like, yeah, I'll do it. And his name's Dre. And she set up a time for me to go, I don't think it was pick him up from school, but when he was getting out of grammar school, to go, and he knew to come to me and to sit and talk. So he got in my car and he sat down and he's nervous and smiling and doing the shit 10-year-olds do. And he's not, he's not an adult, so he's uncomfortable. And I'm like, hey dude, listen, relax. And I just started telling him the story I just told you about baseball. And I started explaining the stuff, and I said, I just really think this is what's happening with you, man. That tell me the truth, you're afraid. You're afraid to fail. You're afraid, you don't like what it feels like now to have just like praise. And as I started really getting into it, his eyes filled up. They welled up. And he started to feel emotional because I hit the nail right on the head and I knew it. And I said, hey, listen, dude, here's what I think we need to do. And I started explaining to him what he needed to tell himself. I'm not going to do it now, but I just gave him all the steps of what to write down, what to repeat, what to say out loud, what to say in his head, all the stuff I want him to do. And I just said this. I said, the reason why you now feel as bad as you do because now you've started giving up. And when you're not trying and you're failing, there's no worse feeling in the world. You just don't know that yet. So here's what I want from you. When you go to your next game, I don't care if you fall on your face trying this. I want you to not give a shit about failing. I want you to run as hard as your legs can run. I want you to be in everyone's grill. I want you to do all the stuff you're taught and to work harder than anyone on that field. And I swear to you, Dre, if you suck, you will walk away from there. And I promise you, you will at least feel okay because you gave it everything you had. It's when we are failing and we give up mentally and physically is when we even feel worse about ourselves, because that's what I did. I explained all this to him. And he said, and I said, are you going to do that? Are you going to go there and be, and yeah, he said. I said, hold on, no. Are you going, and I'm like, and finally he's like, yes. I'm like, okay. Because when it's over, I want to know exactly what happened. And that little shit went out there, and he was a whole different kid the next game. His mother came back and said, listen, he was all over. He scored a goal. He was in everyone's, he was like, and the coach were like, what the hell happened to this kid? And I'll tell you what happened to him. Someone fucking told him. That's what happened to him. Someone told him. And from that day on, and I know he's had challenges and bumps in the road. I've heard about all of them through the years. And again, I take credit for none of that. Only that little kickstart, because his mother and his father are the ones that put everything into this kid. All the time and energy, not me. But I promise you that helped him. And so the point is that's a form of mentorship. That's a form of this. And that's why we need someone in our life to help them. I'll tell you this. If you want to take it back to poker, I'm not a great poker player. I'm not suggesting that. But I'm not a bad poker player anymore. And I'm a winning poker player now. When I first started playing, like if I go back years ago, I would just go to the commerce and rack it up. And, I actually, because I'm not stupid and, I could eke out wins. But then when I started playing on Live at the Bike and I was playing with the killers, the best poker players in the world, and I'll say their names, Art Papazian, Dan Zach, props to you guys, Garrett Adelstein, this guy Jeff, I fucking don't remember how to say your last name. He knows who he is. Andy, all these guys. It was fucking smorgasbord time. It was yum time when I would take seat 5. Okay? A successful business guy coming on a Friday. It's fine. I served my purpose. I had a fucking ball. But guess what? I realized in that process that I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. So I still didn't take it too serious. I started studying a little bit. And I started holding my own. But then in the process where I decided to go get my own poker show and I was shutting down all my other businesses because of COVID and other shit, and I knew I was going to be playing now probably a lot, I went into the lab and I got a mentor and I got someone that I respect, that I work with. Now I tell you that only to tell you that it's because if I didn't, I would be farther back. I'm still not good, but I would be farther back. Right? And so it's this process. You got to take the reps. I play 2 to 4 times a week. I take the reps. I'm on the felt. I'm seeing cards. I'm then working after. I'm studying the hands. I'm figuring out every single mistake I make, which I make a million every time I play, which is, I can't even still understand how that's possible, but it is possible. This is a very complicated game. That's why we love it, right? But I work at it. And guess what? It's more fun when you know what the fuck you're doing. So this applies to all sorts of aspects of anyone's life, whatever that is. Now, I'm going to probably end on that. We're getting close to an hour. But just to kind of tie all this back together, it's like this. Success comes with a price. That price is you got to work. Now, I'm not saying if you're part of a trust fund or you just got lucky in something, great. Congratulations. I'm happy for you. But if you're out there grinding, that's what it takes. Then I think I got a chapter in my book called Rise and Grind, because that's what it takes. You got to work hard. You got to study. You got to train. You got to practice. You got to take reps. And then you got to use your fucking organ, your strongest muscle, your mind, your brain, and you got to protect it. And you got to keep negativity out of it. And you got to fight it, okay? And you got to remember that there are people they're called dream takers, that want to take away your dream because misery loves success. I said that in the last video. And they don't want you to be successful. And I will tell you, your net worth is your net worth. And I am not a guy who hangs around with successful people, but I hang around people that I believe are winners. And here's why. Because you guys see me, I'm in a t-shirt. I under-rep my hand big time in life. It's who I am. I'm not flashy. And I believe every person on this earth is as important as the next, whether they're serving the food, making the food, or eating the food. I really do. And if you believe any different than that, or you act any different, you're a dick. But with that said, when I want to talk business, I talk business with people who know how to talk business. When I want to study poker, I study poker with people who know how to play poker. And when I talk success principles, I talk success principles with the people, because I'll tell you, you'll know who you are by who you hang around with. I know that's cliche, but it's true. So when I was going through the denial phase, when I was in my teens and was dicking around doing everything I shouldn't do, I was running with a crew that did those things. And we were losers, in my opinion. Okay? I mean, if you're going to do those things, I guess just be good at it. Maybe, I don't know if you're going to be a schmuck, be a fucking best schmuck you can be. But I also believe in that too. When you do something, be the best you can be, that you can be, right? So I'm going to read this one little quote in my book, and then we're going to close. And it's very short, so you're lucky, okay? The devil whispers, you can't withstand the storm. Now, the devil is your peers, your wife, your husband, people that maybe in your life not talking positive to you. I don't know who it is. People you know that are just telling you, you can't do this, you can't do this. You're not going to be successful. You're going to lose everything. Don't try it. Oh, you can't take that calculated risk. That's who the devil is, okay? So the devil whispers, you can't withstand this storm. The storm is the bullshit you're going to have to go through to find success. You can't withstand it. Don't do it. But the warrior replies, I am the fucking storm. I am the fucking storm. And that's the kind of mindset and beast mode you got to go into if you want to find success, because the shit ain't easy. But I tell you what, I know you can do it if you want to do it. Okay? That's going to wrap it up. I got nothing else. NV out.